is something almost too ordinary about walking. We do it without ceremony. We do it to get from one room to another, from one errand to the next. We do it half asleep in the morning, and we do it distracted, looking at our phones, thinking about tomorrow. It is the most human of all physical acts, the thing that separates our species from nearly every other form of life on this planet in the particular way we do it: upright, balanced, the weight of the entire body channeled through the architecture of two legs. And yet, despite this ordinariness, despite how reflexive and automatic walking has become to most of us, something remarkable happens inside the body the moment we begin. Something that, if we could see it at the scale of cells and molecules and electrical signals, would take our breath away. So let us ask the question that is right there in the title. The question that I think deserves more than a quick answer. What is the exact moment walking starts to help your heart? I want to sit with that question for a while. Not because it is unanswerable, but because answering it properly requires us to travel through the body in a way that most people never get to do. It requires us to think about time differently, about what a second means inside a cardiovascular system, what a minute means to a blood vessel, what 10 minutes means to the electrical activity of the heart itself. The body does not experience time the way we consciously do. It responds in layers, in cascades, in waves. And walking, it turns out, touches nearly every one of those layers. Let us begin with the very first step. When you lift your foot from the ground and shift your weight forward, your brain has already been preparing your body for several hundred milliseconds. The motor cortex has fired. The cerebellum has coordinated balance. But simultaneously, and this is the part that most people overlook, the autonomic nervous system has already begun adjusting. Before your heart rate has visibly changed on any monitor, before you could ever perceive a shift in your breathing, the nervous system is already in conversation with your cardiovascular system. It is sending what physiologists sometimes call anticipatory signals, a kind of biological readiness that precedes the demand. Your heart, in other words, does not wait to be told. It prepares. Within the first 10 to 15 seconds of walking, your heart rate begins to rise. Not dramatically, not the surge you feel when you sprint for a bus. Just a quiet, steady increase, perhaps 5 to 10 beats per minute above your resting rate if you are walking on level ground at a comfortable pace. And here is something I find genuinely beautiful about this. The mechanism driving that increase in those first seconds is not oxygen demand. Your muscles have not yet depleted the oxygen already dissolved in your blood. The rise in heart rate at the very beginning of exercise is driven almost entirely by the withdrawal of what is called parasympathetic tone. Your vagus nerve, that extraordinary wandering nerve that runs from your brainstem all the way down through your chest and abdomen, normally applies a kind of gentle brake on your heart. At rest, it holds your heart rate lower than it would otherwise naturally sit. The moment you begin to walk, that brake is released, partially, carefully, and the heart is allowed to beat a little faster. The accelerator has not yet been pressed. The brake has simply been lifted. This distinction matters more than it might seem, because it tells us something profound about what the heart is doing at rest versus what it does when we move. A well-trained, healthy heart has a very active parasympathetic brake. It sits at a low resting heart rate, not because it is sluggish, but because it is deeply regulated, because the vagus nerve is in constant, intimate communication with the heart's own pacemaker cells. When we talk about cardiovascular fitness, one of the most meaningful things we are really talking about is the strength of this relationship between the vagus nerve and the heart. Walking, over time, strengthens that relationship. But even in the very first seconds of a single walk, you can already see this relationship in action. By the time 30 seconds have passed, less time than it takes to make a cup of tea, something else has begun. Your muscles are contracting repeatedly now, and each contraction is doing something that most people never visualize. It is physically pumping blood. The veins in your legs, particularly the deep veins, are surrounded by skeletal muscle. Every time those muscles contract during a walking stride, they squeeze those veins, pushing blood upward toward the heart. This is called the skeletal muscle pump, and it is one of the body's most elegant engineering solutions to a fundamental problem. How do you get blood from the lowest points of the body back up to the heart against gravity? You use the act of movement itself. You use walking. And so, in a very literal sense, walking is not just something the heart benefits from indirectly over time. Walking is immediately, mechanically assisting the heart's work. Every step is a tiny assist. This increased venous return, this extra blood arriving at the heart from the working muscles, stretches the chambers of the heart slightly more than at rest. And here, a principle that has been known for over a century comes into play. A principle about how heart muscle behaves when it is stretched. The heart, when its chambers fill with a little more blood than usual, responds by contracting more forcefully on the next beat. This is not a conscious effort. It is a property of cardiac muscle fibers themselves. They respond to stretch with increased power. So your heart, receiving more blood from the pumping action of your legs, begins beating not just a little faster, but a little more powerfully with each stroke. The amount of blood ejected per beat, what we call stroke volume, begins to increase, and this is significant, because a heart that ejects more blood per beat is working efficiently. It is not just spinning faster, it is doing more meaningful work with each contraction. Now we are perhaps 2 minutes into the walk. At this point, the chemistry of your blood has begun to shift. Carbon dioxide levels are rising slightly in the muscles that are working. Lactic acid is beginning to accumulate, very modestly at a comfortable walking pace, but enough to slightly acidify the local environment within those muscle tissues. And your body's sensors, chemoreceptors distributed throughout your arteries and in the brainstem, are detecting these changes and translating them into signals that further adjust cardiovascular function. Your breathing has deepened and is slightly faster. More oxygen is entering the blood with each breath. The distribution of blood flow throughout the body is being quietly redirected, away from organs that can temporarily tolerate reduced flow, like the digestive system, and toward the muscles that are demanding it. Your blood vessels in the working muscles are dilating, opening wider, lowering the resistance that the heart has to pump against. This dilation is not controlled by a conscious signal from the brain. It is local. The muscle itself releases chemical messengers, nitric oxide, adenosine, potassium ions, that act directly on the walls of nearby blood vessels, causing them to relax and expand. And here, I want to pause on nitric oxide for a moment, because it is one of the most important molecules in the story of walking and heart health, and it deserves more than a passing mention. Nitric oxide is a gas, a simple, tiny molecule, one nitrogen atom bonded to one oxygen atom, and yet it is among the most biologically consequential substances in the human cardiovascular system. It is produced by the cells that line the inside of blood vessels, the endothelial cells, and it diffuses directly into the smooth muscle of the vessel wall, causing that muscle to relax, causing the vessel to dilate. This process is continuous. Right now, as you sit listening to me, your endothelial cells are producing nitric oxide, and your blood vessels are at a particular degree of tone, partly because of it. But when you walk, the production of nitric oxide increases substantially. And the mechanism is wonderfully mechanical. Literally, physical. As blood flow increases through the vessels, the movement of blood exerts a force on the inner lining of the vessel wall. This force is called shear stress. And endothelial cells are exquisitely sensitive to shear stress. When they feel it increase, they produce more nitric oxide. So the act of walking increases blood flow, which increases shear stress on vessel walls, which increases nitric oxide production, which dilates vessels further, which reduces the work the heart has to do to push blood through them. This is the cardiovascular system in its full, dynamic, interconnected glory. It is not a simple pump and pipe system. It is a living, sensing, responding network of extraordinary complexity. And walking, humble walking, activates it. By 5 minutes, something else has happened that I think is one of the most underappreciated aspects of early exercise physiology. Your platelets, the tiny cell fragments that participate in blood clotting, have become slightly less sticky. The tendency of blood to clot under conditions of slow flow or vessel injury is a life-saving mechanism, but it also contributes to the risk of heart attack and stroke when clots form in the wrong places at the wrong times. Walking, even after just a few minutes, begins to shift the balance of your blood's clotting chemistry in a favorable direction. The shear forces we just discussed, along with the release of certain substances from vessel walls during increased flow, reduce platelet aggregation. Your blood becomes, in a sense, a little more fluid, a little less inclined to clump. This effect is transient. It does not last forever after you stop walking, but it is real, and it is present, and it begins within those first few minutes of movement. There is something deeply moving to me about this. That a person who has been sitting for hours, whose blood is flowing slowly through their vessels, whose cardiovascular system is in a kind of minimal maintenance mode, that person can take a 5-minute walk and begin to measurably change the biology of their own blood. They do not need equipment. They do not need a prescription. They need to move, and the body responds. That is not a small thing. That is the result of hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary refinement, a biological system so sophisticated that it maintains itself through the very act of being used. Let us keep walking. We are now at 10 minutes. By 10 minutes, something important has happened regarding inflammation. This is a longer time scale than the reflexes of the nervous system or the mechanical pump effects of the muscles, but it is arguably just as important for long-term heart health. Exercise, even moderate walking, triggers the release of substances from muscle cells called myokines. These are signaling molecules that muscles release when they contract, and they have effects throughout the body. One of the most studied is interleukin-6, which during exercise has anti-inflammatory effects on the heart and blood vessels. Chronic low-grade inflammation is now understood to be one of the central mechanisms through which cardiovascular disease develops over time. The inner linings of the arteries, particularly the coronary arteries that supply the heart muscle itself, become inflamed in a slow, smoldering way over years of metabolic stress, high blood pressure, high blood glucose, and inactivity. This inflammation contributes to the development of plaques, the fatty deposits that narrow arteries and can rupture to cause heart attacks. Walking, by triggering the release of myokines with each session, is essentially bathing the cardiovascular system in mild anti-inflammatory signals. Not dramatically, not enough to reverse advanced disease in a single walk, but consistently, cumulatively over weeks and months, these signals add up. They reduce the inflammatory environment that makes arteries vulnerable. They make the inner linings of blood vessels more stable, more resilient, less prone to the damage that leads to plaque formation. And there is something philosophically important here that I want to name explicitly. The exact moment walking starts to help the heart is not a single moment. It is a nested set of moments happening at different time scales simultaneously. The nervous system responds in seconds. The mechanical pump effects begin with the first stride. The blood vessel dilation and nitric oxide response unfolds over 2 to 5 minutes. The blood chemistry shifts are measurable by 5 to 10 minutes. The anti-inflammatory signals from muscle are circulating by 10 to 15 minutes. And the structural changes to the heart and blood vessels, the adaptations that come from regular walking over weeks, those are a still longer scale, a kind of slow remodeling that the body undertakes when it detects that movement is a consistent feature of daily life. So when does walking start to help the heart? The truest answer is from the very first step, and in ways that deepen and multiply the longer you walk and the more regularly you walk. But let us stay with the physiology a little longer, because there is more to say, and it matters. Around the 15 to 20 minute mark in a moderate walk, if you are maintaining a comfortable pace, something interesting happens to the hormonal landscape. Epinephrine, adrenaline, has been gradually increasing since the walk began. At this level of exercise, it is not surging the way it would in a panic or during intense exertion, but it is elevated enough to be doing useful cardiovascular work. One of adrenaline's effects is to stimulate the heart's pacemaker cells more strongly, further increasing heart rate and the force of contraction. Another effect is to mobilize fatty acids from fat tissue to begin releasing stored energy into the bloodstream. These fatty acids can be taken up by both muscle cells and heart muscle cells as fuel. The heart, remarkably, runs predominantly on fat during moderate exercise. It is one of the few organs in the body that actually prefers fat as a fuel source, and walking, gentle, sustained, moderate walking, is precisely the kind of activity that keeps fat metabolism running. This preference of the heart for fat has consequences for the kind of adaptations that develop over time with regular walking. A heart that regularly engages in fat metabolism becomes more efficient at it. The mitochondria, the energy-producing structures within heart muscle cells, multiply and become more capable. Over weeks of regular walking, the energy metabolism of the heart itself improves. It becomes, at a cellular level, more capable of sustaining its work for longer, more resilient in the face of metabolic stress. I think often about the word resilience in the context of cardiac health. We use it loosely sometimes, almost metaphorically. But there is a real, biological meaning to cardiac resilience. It refers to the ability of the heart to maintain function under stress, to recover quickly when that stress passes, to handle interruptions in blood supply, those dangerous moments when a small vessel might temporarily spasm, or a tiny clot might partially obstruct flow, without the damage that would otherwise occur. A resilient heart survives minor insults that a less conditioned heart might not. And much of what we know about how regular physical activity builds this resilience comes down to two things: improved energy metabolism and changes in the heart's electrical system. The electrical system of the heart is something that I suspect most people almost never think about. It feels too abstract, too hidden behind the experience of simply feeling your heartbeat. But it is responsible for everything. The heart does not just squeeze and relax randomly. Each heartbeat is a carefully orchestrated electrical event, a wave of charge that begins in a small cluster of specialized cells in the upper right chamber and spreads across the entire heart in a precise sequence, coordinating the contraction of hundreds of millions of individual muscle cells, so that they work together as a unified pump rather than a trembling, chaotic mass. This electrical precision is what keeps you alive. And it is a system that is profoundly influenced by the autonomic nervous system, by the chemical environment of the blood, and by the physical conditioning of the heart itself. One of the most well-documented effects of regular aerobic exercise, including regular walking, is an improvement in what cardiologists call heart rate variability. This is a measure of how much the time between successive heartbeats varies from beat to beat. It sounds counterintuitive. We tend to think of a regular heartbeat as a steady, perfectly metronomic thing, and deviation from regularity as a sign of something wrong. But in fact, a healthy heart does not beat at perfectly equal intervals. It varies slightly from beat to beat in response to breathing, to the demands of the body, to the constant dialogue between the vagus nerve and the pacemaker cells. This variability is a sign of a responsive, well-regulated cardiovascular system. Low heart rate variability, a more rigid, metronomic heartbeat, is associated with higher risk of cardiovascular events and poorer recovery from cardiac illness. Regular walking increases heart rate variability. It strengthens the vagal tone, the parasympathetic brake we discussed at the very beginning, and it makes the heart more responsive and flexible in its rhythm. This is one of the reasons that people who walk regularly have lower resting heart rates over time. It is not simply that their hearts have become stronger and can pump more blood per beat, so they need fewer beats per minute to meet the body's needs. It is also that the nervous system regulation of the heart has improved, that the brake is stronger, and the conversation between brain and heart is richer and more nuanced. If I could give you one image to carry with you from this lecture, it would be this. The healthy, well-walked heart is not a silent, isolated pump. It is a deeply connected organ, in constant dialogue with the nervous system, with the chemistry of the blood, with the demands of the muscles, with the breathing of the lungs. And walking is one of the most effective and accessible ways to enrich all of those dialogues simultaneously. There is a period in a walk, somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes in, where, if you are paying attention, you might notice a subtle shift in how you feel. The initial effort has settled. Your body has found its rhythm. Your breathing is steady. There is a kind of quiet alertness that sets in. This is not imaginary, and it is not purely psychological. It reflects real changes in the chemistry of your brain and blood. Endorphins are rising, not the dramatic surge of runner's euphoria, but a quiet, steady increase in the brain's own pain-modulating, mood-stabilizing molecules. Serotonin release is enhanced. Blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with attention, reasoning, and emotional regulation, has increased. The stress hormones cortisol and adrenaline, which initially rose with the exercise, begin to settle back toward baseline even as the walk continues, because the body has adapted to the effort and no longer perceives it as a threat. And I want to stay with cortisol for a moment, because its relationship to the heart is one of the most important and least discussed aspects of cardiovascular health. Cortisol is a steroid hormone released by the adrenal glands in response to stress, physical, psychological, metabolic. In short bursts, it is useful. It mobilizes energy, it sharpens attention, it prepares the body for challenge. But chronically elevated cortisol, the kind that comes from persistent psychological stress, poor sleep, and sedentary living, is genuinely damaging to the cardiovascular system. It promotes inflammation. It raises blood pressure by causing the kidneys to retain sodium and by sensitizing blood vessels to the constricting effects of adrenaline. It interferes with insulin signaling, pushing blood glucose levels higher and contributing to the metabolic conditions that accelerate arterial disease. And it remodels the heart itself over time, in ways that are not favorable, thickening the walls of the left ventricle in a pattern that impairs rather than enhances cardiac function. Regular walking, not just one walk, but the habit of walking, the committed, daily or near-daily practice, reduces the baseline level of cortisol in the body. It does this partly through direct effects on the adrenal glands and partly through its effects on sleep quality, which is itself one of the most powerful regulators of cortisol. People who walk regularly sleep better. Their cortisol follows a healthier daily rhythm, high in the morning when it needs to be to support waking and alertness, low in the evening and at night when the heart needs rest. This circadian pattern of cortisol is protective for the heart in ways that researchers are still exploring. But the association between disrupted cortisol rhythms and cardiovascular risk is robust and well established. So here is the picture that is building. Walking, even a single walk, begins helping the heart from the very first step through a combination of nervous system signals, mechanical muscle pump effects, blood vessel dilation, improved blood chemistry, and the activation of hormonal responses that together increase cardiac efficiency and reduce the work the heart has to do. But regular walking as a consistent feature of daily life, goes further. It remodels the cardiovascular system at a structural level. It changes the heart's electrical behavior, improving its responsiveness and flexibility. It reduces chronic inflammation. It normalizes the hormonal environment that surrounds the heart. It improves energy metabolism within the heart muscle itself. It trains the blood vessels to dilate more readily and to maintain their inner linings in better condition. None of these effects require intensity. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive message in all of exercise physiology, because our culture tends to equate benefit with effort, tends to assume that more pain means more gain, that the cardiovascular benefits of exercise are proportional to how hard you push yourself. But the evidence for walking, gentle, comfortable, sustainable walking, is some of the most compelling in all of preventive cardiology. Study after study, conducted in different populations across different countries, following people for years and sometimes decades, consistently shows that people who walk regularly have lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of stroke, lower rates of heart failure, and lower rates of death from cardiovascular causes than people who do not walk. And the dose-response curve is fascinating. Most of the benefit accrues relatively early. The difference between walking 0 minutes per day and walking 30 minutes per day is enormous, far larger than the difference between walking 30 minutes and walking 60. The first 30 minutes of daily walking is where the cardiovascular return on investment is most dramatic. This does not mean that more walking is not better. It generally is. But it does mean that for someone who is currently sedentary, beginning to walk for 30 minutes on most days represents one of the most powerful cardiovascular interventions available, comparable in its long-term effects too. Medications that cardiologists prescribe for exactly these reasons. I find this democratizing. Medications have costs, side effects, access barriers. Walking, in most circumstances, is free. It does not require a prescription or a gym membership or specialized equipment. It can be done at any pace that is comfortable. It can be built into daily life, walking to the shops, walking to work, walking in a park, walking after dinner. And the body responds to all of these walks. It does not require that you know what is happening inside your cardiovascular system while you walk. The physiology unfolds whether you are aware of it or not. The nitric oxide rises. The vagal tone improves. The myokines flow from your working muscles. The electrical system of your heart becomes subtly more flexible. All of it, quietly, without drama, simply because you moved. But I think awareness matters. I think it changes something, not in the body necessarily, but in the mind's relationship to the body, when you know what is actually happening during a walk. When you feel your heart rate rise in the first minute, and you understand that this is your parasympathetic brake releasing, that your vagus nerve is allowing your heart a little more freedom, that this is a healthy and carefully regulated response, you relate to that sensation differently. It is not a warning, it is a conversation. When you feel your legs working and you know that each contraction of your calf muscles is squeezing the veins in your legs and pushing blood back toward your heart. That you are mechanically assisting one of the most important organs in your body just by the act of striding. You feel the walk differently. You feel like a participant in something extraordinary rather than someone just trying to get their steps in. There is a branch of psychology that studies how people's relationship to their own bodies affects their health behaviors. And one of the consistent findings is that people who feel connected to their bodies, who have a sense of what is happening inside them and why, are more likely to engage in behaviors that support their health over time. Not because they are more disciplined or more motivated in some abstract sense, but because the behavior feels meaningful. Walking becomes less of an obligation and more of a conversation with your own biology. This is what I want to offer in these final reflections, not just the science, but a frame for thinking about what the science means. The cardiovascular system is ancient. Hearts, in various forms, have been beating in living creatures for hundreds of millions of years. The human heart has been beating continuously since before your birth, contracting approximately once per second, somewhere between 2 and 3 billion times in an average lifetime, without ever taking a day off, without ever fully resting, sustained only by the blood it itself pumps through. The coronary arteries that feed its own muscle. It is, in the most unrhetorical sense, a devoted organ. It asks very little of you. It does its work in the background of everything else you do, every conversation, every decision, every night of sleep, every meal, every moment of joy or grief, or ordinary Tuesday afternoon. And what it asks in return, what it quietly responds to, is movement. Not extreme movement, not performance, not athletic achievement. Simply the act of walking, the ordinary, ancient, deeply human act of putting one foot in front of the other. The heart has been walking with the human body for as long as there have been human bodies. These systems evolved together. The cardiovascular responses to walking that we have traced through this lecture are not adaptations to modern exercise science. They are the original design. We were built for this. Our hearts were shaped over evolutionary time to expect and to benefit from the mechanical assistance of the walking body, the regular rhythmic contracting of the leg muscles, the sheer stress of blood flowing through vessels that are being used, the chemical signals of a body in purposeful, moderate motion. When we stop walking, when sedentary living becomes the norm, we are not simply failing to gain a benefit. We are withdrawing something that the cardiovascular system was built to expect. The vessel walls, not feeling the sheer stress of increased blood flow, produce less nitric oxide and become less elastic over time. The heart's electrical system, deprived of the regular variability that movement creates, becomes more rigid. The anti-inflammatory signals from contracting muscles stop arriving. The cortisol that stress produces accumulates without the metabolic relief valve that regular exercise provides. The blood-clotting chemistry tips very slowly toward a more dangerous balance. All of this happens quietly, over years, without dramatic symptoms, until one day, for too many people, it is not quiet anymore. But the reverse is also true. The body's capacity for recovery and adaptation is remarkable. Blood vessels can improve their function within weeks of beginning a walking program. Heart rate variability can improve. Inflammatory markers can fall. Blood pressure can decrease modestly in many people, but meaningfully, especially when combined with the other lifestyle changes that walking often catalyzes. Sleep improves, which normalizes cortisol, which further reduces cardiovascular risk. Mood improves, which reduces the chronic stress that drives so much cardiovascular damage. The whole system moves in a better direction, and it moves because you moved. I want to end where we began, with the question: What is the exact moment walking starts to help your heart? It is the moment the parasympathetic brake lifts in the first seconds of the first stride. It is the moment the calf muscles squeeze the deep veins and send the first additional surge of blood back toward the heart. It is the moment the endothelial cells feel the increased flow and begin releasing their tiny, crucial molecules of nitric oxide into the vessel walls. It is the moment the muscle cells release their anti-inflammatory signals into the bloodstream. It is the moment the body begins recalibrating its stress hormones, its electrical rhythms, its metabolic engines, all of them shifting, all of them responding, all of them doing what they evolved to do when a human being stands up and walks. It is the first step. It is every step after that. And it is the accumulation of all those steps, day after day, in ordinary life, that gives the heart what it has always been designed to receive.